Welcome back to Koala Finance. Every time you walk into a supermarket in Australia, you are walking into a carefully constructed illusion. You see thousands of products, hundreds of brands, and endless special tags. But the reality is that for every dollar Australians spend on groceries, 65 cents goes into the pockets of just two companies. We call them Coles Worth. In the UK and the US, fierce competition keeps prices down. But here in Australia, we have one of the most concentrated food markets on earth. They control the supply chain, they dictate terms to farmers, and ultimately, they decide the price of your dinner. Today, we are peeling back the layers of the aisle to answer the big question. Is this just good business, or is it a rigged game? This is the supermarket duopoly, how Coles and Woolworths control what you eat. Walk into any major shopping centre in Australia, from the bustling precincts of Sydney to the regional hubs of Queensland, and you are participating in a carefully constructed economic illusion. The shelves are stocked, the fluorescent lights hum, and thousands of colourful brands compete for your attention. But peel back the packaging and the reality of the Australian food supply reveals itself to be starkly different. We are not a free market of endless competition. We are a captured market dominated by an entity colloquially known as Colesworth. In the United Kingdom, the United States, and Europe, the grocery sector is a brutal battleground where margins are razor thin and consumers hold the power. In Australia, it is a fortress. Two companies, Coles and Woolworths, control upwards of 65% of the entire grocery market. A concentration of power almost unseen in the developed world. This dominance has crystallised at a moment of profound national fragility. As we navigate the choppy waters of 2026, the Australian economy is being buffeted by global winds, from the slowdown in China's industrial engine to the persistent inflationary pressure radiating from the United States. But unlike the price of oil or the exchange rate of the Australian dollar, which are dictated by global markets, the price of your dinner is being decided in boardrooms in Bella Vista and Hawthorne East. For the average Australian family, the supermarket checkout has become the front line of the cost of living crisis. While headline inflation figures fluctuate, food prices have remained stubbornly sticky, eating away at disposable income and forcing households to make impossible choices between nutrition and solvency. As we stand on the precipice of a per capita recession, understanding the mechanics of this duopoly is no longer just an academic exercise in economics. It is a matter of financial survival. This is the story of how Australia fed a monopoly and how that monopoly is now eating the Australian wallet. To understand why the weekly grocery shop has transformed from a routine chore into a source of acute financial anxiety, we must look beyond the sliding doors and into the macroeconomic storm clouds gathering over Australia. The nation is currently trapped in a persistent cost of living crisis that has mutated from a temporary post-pandemic spike into a structural feature of daily life. While the Australian Bureau of Statistics may report that headline inflation has moderated from its terrifying peaks, the reality on the ground is far more punitive. We are witnessing a phenomenon economists call sticky inflation, particularly in essential goods. This means that while the price of discretionary items like televisions or electronics may be stabilising, the price of survival, bread, dairy and protein, remains elevated, refusing to revert to the mean. Crucially, there is a growing disconnect between global input costs and domestic shelf prices. Global commodity prices for wheat, edible oils and fertilisers, which surged violently following the invasion of Ukraine, have largely normalised in international markets. Yet Australian consumers are not seeing this relief passed on at the register. This asymmetry is what economists refer to as the rocket and feather effect. Prices shoot up like a rocket when input costs rise, but drift down like a feather when those costs fall. In a hyper-competitive market, retailers would race to cut prices to win market share as their costs decrease. In Australia, that race is conspicuously absent. This lack of price elasticity is a flashing warning light for the economy, suggesting that market forces are broken. The social consequences of this pricing power are visible and alarming. Foodbank Australia reports that over 3.7 million households experienced food insecurity in the last year. a statistic that shames a nation capable of feeding 75 million people through its agricultural output. We are seeing the emergence of a new demographic at charity food hampers, dual income mortgage holders. These are families who, on paper, are fully employed and middle class, yet after servicing a mortgage rate that has tripled and paying record electricity bills, have literally zero liquidity left for food. The crisis is not just about the price of lettuce, it is about the erosion of the Australian standard of living, creating a fertile environment for dominant market players to maintain record margins while their customers slide into poverty. To fully comprehend the strength of the Colesworth stranglehold, we must zoom out from the local aisle to the geopolitical chessboard. Australia is a nation defined by the tyranny of distance, sitting at the very end of the world's longest and most fragile supply chains. In a stable global order, this is manageable. But in the volatile economic climate of 2026, this geography becomes a liability that the duopoly weaponizes. The Australian economy is currently being squeezed by a pincer movement of external forces. On one side, the slowing growth engine of China has softened demand for our iron ore, dragging the Australian dollar down to precarious lows against the greenback. A weak AUD is effectively an import tax on the nation while we grow our own food, the machinery to harvest it, the fuel to transport it, and the packaging to wrap it are largely imported and priced in US dollars. Here lies the genius of the duopoly's model. When the Australian dollar falls or global oil prices spike, these giants do not absorb the cost, they amplify it. They possess sophisticated algorithmic pricing engines that allow them to pass these external shocks directly to the consumer with surgical precision, protecting their margins in real time. Smaller independent grocers lacking these hedging capabilities and deep logistical networks are crushed by the same volatility. Furthermore, the pricing of our domestic produce is not set in Canberra, but in global markets. The price of an Australian steak on a shelf in Melbourne is inextricably linked to what a buyer in Shanghai or Tokyo is willing to pay for it. When global food security anxiety rises, export demand surges, establishing a high floor price for Australian families. We are effectively competing with the rest of the world for our own agricultural output. Simultaneously, the monetary gravity of the United States exerts a crushing pressure. With the US Federal Reserve maintaining a higher for longer interest rate regime to combat their own sticky inflation, the Reserve Bank of Australia is forced to keep domestic rates restrictive to prevent a total currency collapse. This high cost of capital acts as a barrier to entry for any potential challenger. Building a new logistics network or a rival supermarket chain requires billions in upfront capital, money that is now prohibitively expensive to borrow. Thus, the macroeconomic environment of 2026, characterized by expensive money, weak currency, and geopolitical friction, acts as a protective moat for Coles and Woolworths. The chaos that hurts the consumer actually solidifies the position of the incumbent giants, leaving the average Australian trapped, paying global prices with a shrinking local currency. To grasp the sheer magnitude of this market distortion, we must place Australia on the global scale. In the world of economics, market concentration is often measured by the Herfindahl-Hirschman Index, and by this metric, the Australian grocery sector is a statistical anomaly. In the United Kingdom, a market culturally similar to our own, the landscape is a fierce battleground. The market leader, Tesco, commands roughly 27% of the share, constantly fending off aggressive challenges from Sainsbury's, Asda, Morrisons, and the German discounters Aldi and Lidl. In the United States, despite the monolithic presence of Walmart, the sheer size of the population supports a diverse ecosystem of regional giants like Kroger, Costco, and Trader Joe's, ensuring that price gouging in one chain is quickly punished by consumer migration to another. In these jurisdictions, the consumer is the referee. In Australia, the consumer is merely a spectator. The most chilling parallel to the Australian situation is found not in Europe or America, but in our economic twin, Canada. Like Australia, Canada is a resource-rich nation with a sparse population, a history of protectionism, and a banking sector dominated by a Big Four. And just like Australia, Canada is currently in the grip of a grocery oligopoly dominated by giants like Loblaws, Metro and Empire. The similarities are uncanny in both nations. Accusations of greedflation, raising prices above the rate of inflation to pad profit margins, have sparked parliamentary inquiries and public outrage. The Canadian experience serves as a dark mirror for Australia. Despite public boycotts and political grandstanding, the structural power of the oligopoly has remained largely untouched. It demonstrates that without legislative teeth, public anger is insufficient to break a cartel. This brings us to the nuclear option of economic policy: divestiture laws. In the United States, antitrust regulators possess the power to break up companies that become too dominant, a legacy of the trust-busting era that dismantled Standard Oil. It is a sword of Damocles that hangs over every American CEO, enforcing competition through the threat of annihilation. In Australia, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, ACCC, lacks this trigger. It can block future mergers, but it cannot unwind the past. We have built a regulatory system that is excellent at observing monopolies, but powerless to dismantle them. We are effectively bringing a notepad to a knife fight. The result is a lazy economy, where the dominant players compete on marketing budgets and loyalty schemes rather than on price or innovation, secure in the knowledge that the government lacks the legislative weaponry to truly threaten their existence. To understand the true permanence of the Coles and Woolworths hegemony, we must stop looking at them merely as retailers and start viewing them as what they truly are: real estate behemoths. The duopoly's power is physically cemented into the Australian landscape through a strategy that blends aggressive acquisition with defensive land banking. In the world of commercial real estate, Coles and Woolworths are known as anchor tenants. They are the gravitational centre of any shopping precinct. Without them, foot traffic collapses and the viability of smaller specialty stores, bakers, butchers, newsagents evaporates. This gives them unprecedented leverage over landlords, allowing them to dictate lease terms that historically included restrictive covenants, clauses specifically designed to prevent a rival supermarket from opening in the same centre. While regulators have fought to dismantle these clauses, the physical dominance remains. They have effectively captured the high ground of every major Australian suburb, leaving potential competitors with nowhere to build. The effectiveness of this real estate moat was brutally demonstrated by the exit of Kaufland. The German retail giant, backed by billions in capital and eager to disrupt the Australian market, abandoned its expansion plans in 2020 before opening a single store. Why? Because securing viable sites in a market where the incumbents control the best land and the planning permissions are a labyrinthine nightmare proved mathematically impossible. In 2026, with construction costs soaring and land values in capital cities remaining astronomically high, that barrier to entry has hardened into a concrete wall. The duopoly does not need to compete on price if they can simply prevent a competitor from existing within a 5-kilometre radius of your home. They have won the war before the first shot is fired, simply by owning the battlefield. However, the damage extends beyond the urban sprawl to the very soil of the nation. Economists describe the duopoly's relationship with Australian farmers not as a monopoly, one seller, but as a monopsony, a market with only one major buyer. For a fruit grower in the Goulburn Valley or a dairy farmer in Victoria, there is often no alternative route to market. If they do not accept the price dictated by the big two, their produce rots in the field. This power imbalance has created a hollowed-out agricultural sector where margins are stripped from the producers and transferred to the retailers. We are witnessing a slow-motion crisis in regional Australia where multi-generational family farms are becoming insolvent, unable to absorb the rising costs of fertiliser and fuel, while being squeezed by a buyer that demands lower prices to fund their own record profits. The duopoly is effectively strip mining the Australian agricultural base, prioritising quarterly shareholder returns over the long-term viability of the nation's food security. As public fury over grocery prices reached a crescendo in 2024 and 2025, the political machinery in Canberra finally engaged, but the response has revealed the limits of government power in a concentrated economy. We have witnessed a flurry of Senate inquiries, ACC investigations and stern press conferences from the Treasurer. The headline outcome was the transformation of the Grocery Code of Conduct from a voluntary gentleman's agreement into a mandatory framework with multi-million-dollar penalties for breaches. On paper, this protects suppliers from being bullied. In reality, for corporations generating tens of billions in revenue, a fine of a few $1,000,000 is merely a cost of doing business, a rounding error on the balance sheet easily absorbed or passed on to the consumer. The Reserve Bank of Australia finds itself in an equally impotent position regarding this specific type of inflation. The RBA's only tool is the blunt instrument of interest rates. By hiking rates, they can crush consumer demand for new cars or renovations, but they cannot stop people from needing to eat. In fact, the duopoly's pricing power effectively neutralises the RBA's efforts. When the supermarkets raise prices to protect their margins, they feed the very inflation the RBA is trying to kill. The central bank is forced to keep rates higher for longer to compensate for this lack of competition, meaning the average mortgage holder is effectively paying a monopoly tax twice. Once at the checkout through higher food prices, and again on their mortgage through higher interest rates. The true nuclear option, divestiture powers, or the legal ability to break up the giants, remains the third rail of Australian politics. While the Greens and crossbenchers have championed laws similar to those in the US and UK, the major parties have balked, citing fears of sovereign risk and unintended job losses. The argument is that breaking up the supply chain efficiencies of Coles and Woolworths could paradoxically lead to higher prices in the short term. This political paralysis leaves Australia in a regulation limbo. We acknowledge the market is broken, but we lack the political will to perform the surgery required to fix it. We are left with a system of monitoring and naming and shaming, a strategy that relies on the conscience of a corporation, an entity designed solely to maximise profit. For the Australian consumer, waiting for legislative salvation is a strategy of diminishing returns. The Colesworth machine is a slow-turning tanker. Even if aggressive new laws like the price gouging ban, set for July 2026, are enacted, the impact on shelf prices will take years to materialise. In the immediate term, the per capita recession demands a radical shift in household logistics. The most effective weapon against the duopoly is not a vote at the ballot box, but a capital strike at the checkout. We are already seeing the early stages of this migration. The Aldi switch is no longer just for the budget conscious. It has become a middle-class survival strategy. With a market share pushing toward 15%. The German discounter, and increasingly bulk giants like Costco, are the only entities applying genuine deflationary pressure on the big two. However, true financial resilience requires more than just swapping brands. It demands a decoupling from the convenience economy. The duopoly's entire business model is predicated on the lazy tax, the premium you pay for getting everything in one place. Defeating this requires a return to fragmented consumption. Is buying meat from a local butcher, often cheaper and higher quality due to shorter supply chains, produce from local markets and non-perishables in bulk from alternative platforms like Amazon or independent discount chains. It is a trade-off of time for money, a calculation that every household must now weigh carefully. Furthermore, the private label revolution is not a temporary trend. It is a permanent structural shift. In Europe, private label goods, generic brands, make up 40-50% of supermarket sales. In Australia, that figure has historically been lower, around 18 to 20%. But as inflation erodes brand loyalty, we are rapidly converging with the European model. The smart money is accepting that paying for the logo is a luxury of the past. The down stickers are marketing. The shift to unbranded consumption is economics. Your personal inflation rate is determined by what you put in your basket, and in 2026, the only way to beat the CPI is to mercilessly cut the brand tax out of your life. As we stand at the checkout of the future, the scanner beeps with a warning that goes far beyond the price of milk. If the supermarket duopoly is merely a symptom of the broader Australian disease, a lack of competition, a fear of complexity, and a reliance on oligopolies to manage our essential services. We have allowed our banking, our aviation, our energy, and our food systems to concentrate into the hands of a few powerful players, creating an economy that is efficient for shareholders but brutal for citizens. The lucky country has become the expensive country, where the cost of entry is high and the choices are few. The trajectory of the next decade will be defined by how we answer this challenge. Will we continue to accept the Colesworth consensus, where we pay global prices for local produce while our farmers struggle to survive? Or will we demand a market that actually serves the people who live in it? The mandatory grocery code of conduct and the looming price gouging laws are a start, but they are band-aids on a broken limb. True change requires the courage to break the structural dominance, to unlock the land banking, to smash the restrictive covenants, and to invite genuine global competition to our shores. Until that day comes, the power resides in your pocket. Every dollar you spend is a vote for the kind of economy you want. By supporting independent grocers, by seeking out farmers' markets, and by refusing to accept the convenience tax, you are sending a signal that the duopoly cannot ignore. The era of the passive consumer is over. In the face of a concentrated market, the most revolutionary act you can commit is to take your business elsewhere. The checkout is closed. The real work begins now. You work your whole life contributing to your super, trusting it will be there when you retire. But with a government hungry for revenue and a system worth trillions, is your nest egg really safe from politicians? In our next documentary, we are investigating the hidden risks facing your retirement. You cannot afford to miss this. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications for The Superannuation Trap. Is the $1 trillion system actually safe?